My name is Juliana Nykolaiszyn with the Oklahoma State University Library. Today is Wednesday, December 15th, 2010, and I'm in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, interviewing Esther Houser. This interview is being conducted as part of the inductees of the Oklahoma Women's Hall of Fame Oral History Project. Esther Houser was inducted into the Oklahoma Women's Hall of Fame in 2003. Thank you for joining us today.
You're welcome.
Well, we'd like to begin by learning a little bit more about you. Could you tell us a little bit about where you grew up and give us a little background into your early life?
Okay, well, whether or not it's appropriate for someone in the Oklahoma Women's Hall of Fame, I was born in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and raised in a little town outside Harrisburg, which is the capital. The little town was New Cumberland, Pennsylvania, and lived there till after high school graduation. And subsequently moved to Oklahoma. But I was raised in just sort of a normal 1950s, 1960s small town atmosphere with nothing much going on in the town, and no big crises or exciting events taking place. Nothing historical, I don't think, ever happened in New Cumberland since the settlers took it over sometime in the, 1400, who knows, 1500, 1600. It was a beautiful sort of bucolic area, and that was a pleasant place to grow up.
Well, tell me a little bit about the schools you attended growing up.
I started in an old schoolhouse in New Cumberland, little brick building with the Fifth Street School. I remember because we used to always walk to school. But a new elementary school was built, and I started second grade there, Hillside Elementary. When I was a toddler, I used to go over and watch the workmen building it, not knowing I'd be trapped there for several years. When I was in third grade, we moved across town in New Cumberland, and I had to change schools, but went to a place called Manor School that was torn down since I left. It was very, very shocking to not be able to find it. At least it wasn't my memory when I went back to look for it, that it wasn't there. Graduated from high school at Cedar Cliff High School in Camp Hill, Pennsylvania, which was alleged to be one of the top three schools in Pennsylvania. It's a public school, very academically oriented. There was the junior high that I went to and Cedar Cliff both had accelerated programs, and I feel like I had pretty good teachers and kind of a fast program of trying to teach us, whether it was advanced math, which didn't work so well for me, or science, language. There were many more languages taught in the public schools in Pennsylvania, I think, than in Oklahoma. Took Latin for 3 years in junior high, and Spanish and German in high school. Could have taken more Latin, but that was a pretty neat part about the college, about the high school. And then coming to Oklahoma, I expected, I guess, a more rigorous academic environment based on the high school I'd attended, and was sort of perplexed and disappointed when I enrolled and started at OU.
Well, going back to those early years, what would you do for fun?
I think I could be safely categorized as a tomboy. I did have dolls, and I played with them for endless hours. And I loved to read, and liked nothing better than to be left alone with a good book. But I went on bike hikes, used to like to ride my fat, tired, heavy, women's huffy bicycle around town. And Pennsylvania, unlike many places in Oklahoma, has a lot of hills and mountains. So there was a lot of topography to accomplish. I like to go, play in the woods. There were some woods near the house. I had a friend in 3rd grade through about 7th grade when she moved to Virginia that we would call ourselves Trouble and Trouble Incorporated. And we would go on bike hikes or explore the woods, or we weren't really getting into anything bad, and I don't know why we thought we could rise to the level of Trouble and Trouble Incorporated, but we had a good time. But I had lots of friends, and just enjoyed mostly playing outside. The fun things that with my father, I went with my one brother and my father on fishing trips, camping. Dad took us on walks in the woods every Sunday afternoon for a long time that I remember, and taught us woodcraft and animal track and all sorts of things that have still stuck with me.
Lots of time outdoors.
Lots of time outdoors.
You mentioned your father. How big was your family?
I had 2 brothers. I called them the good one and the evil one once I, learned to differentiate. I had an older brother who was 8 years older that was always very kind to me, and another brother who was just a year older who was just mean as a snake. And we fought and actually went to fisticuffs practically every day of my young life. Mother and father lived in the home, and it was usually just us. On occasion, my grandmother would come from Pittsburgh and spend a few months, but it was usually just the 5 of us.
And your parents' occupation?
Mother was a housewife. I think she would have done better and been happier if she'd worked outside the home, because I think she was an excellent manager and she got bored with housewifery. Dad started, I guess, as a mechanic, but he went to work at Olmsted Air Force Base, civil service with the Air Force, in the first year of my life, which is why we moved from Lancaster County to New Cumberland. And he worked first in the shops doing aircraft part repair, and gradually progressed, although I'm not sure he enjoyed it as much as hands-on work with the machinery, but a level of management. He was in production control, civil service, and that's how he was transferred when the Air Force Base was closed down, transferred to Tinker.
Okay. I guess that would explain how you ended up in Oklahoma.
Well, I graduated from high school, and my mother waited back there with me, and they didn't sell the house. Although I would have been happy to have stayed with friends instead of with mother for the last year of high school. But because I was in such a good high school, and because other students that had migrated with that base closure to Oklahoma had found themselves in a position of being a year or two ahead or farther ahead from the schools in Midwest City, they let me stay back and graduate from Cedar Cliff. But I thought, I'm not staying in my small town where I was raised my entire life. I had expected to go to Bryn Mawr or someplace, but I thought, shoot, might as well see what Oklahoma's like. I had heard it alleged that they had a good school of archaeology, and so I came here.
Well, just want to take a step back for a second. So when you're growing up, did you want to be an archaeologist? What did you want to be?
Oh, from the time I first laid hands on a National Geographic and saw the digs in Egypt and Greece and those places. I think from the time I was 5, I just believed I was going to be an archaeologist, and didn't ever expect to end up as a social. I didn't know social workers existed, but no, I'd always anticipated. Even my high school yearbook, I think, mentions archaeology, because I just always expected to do that.
So you get to OU,
and
where did the change happen?
Well, I majored in anthropology, and had some friends in the women's honors housing who were also in anthropology, and I had some of those first classes, the basic classes. I will not name the professors, who were just tearfully boring and wanted us to memorize all the artifacts found at certain digs. I've always been a person who wanted to know why, and I never really got the sense at 8 o'clock in the morning in those classes of why exactly the professor needed us to know that. And it was not what I had expected. Social anthropology was even scarier, but that was the people. And the linguistics, the linguistics courses that I had in anthropology were the most interesting. But in the meantime, one of the women who was in this configuration of friends had changed to social work as a major. I had no idea what that was, but I realized in talking to her that that's what I'd been doing for free my entire life, that people had always come to me and, whether I was a good listener or not, I don't know, but would pour out their secrets, pour out their hearts to me. And I'm not a gossip and I don't tell those things. And so I would, I guess, feed back to them what I heard and sometimes provide some suggestions. But I thought, shoot, with this kind of training, this kind of education in anthropology, I'm going to end up in the back room of a museum for the rest of my life. I will never see the light of day in the Middle East or in Europe or Greece. And, I didn't know you could actually make a living, not that it's a good living, but you could make a living in social work. So I took one course and was just sold. The professor, Judy Norland, was very inspirational. And, I made that change of major, I think it was in my second year at OU.
And during that time, were you working as a student?
I worked in the summers. I thought, this is probably my last chance facing adulthood to not have to work the entire year around. And although I had especially one very productive and much brighter than I am, I assume, friend, Gail Feitz, who worked during the school year in the cafeteria and did that sort of thing, and who would go on trips in the summer. I instead, didn't work during the school year and then had to work in the summer. The first year after my freshman year, my first summer here was abysmal. I was just in deep culture shock. We'd moved a week or so after my high school graduation, so the dead of summer in Oklahoma from Pennsylvania, where winter had been my favorite season. And I would complain and whine if it got to be 80 degrees in the summer. And moved to Oklahoma, and it was just beastly. The wind blew, it was flat, there were no trees. It was hotter than Hades, and I thought, I have made a serious tactical error, and there's no way out of it, because I had, of course, no money, no plan to escape. So I worked at Brahms the first summer and developed a good forearm muscle. But the summer after my freshman year, I got a job at Tinker, a summer job. And as luck had it, because my father had no pool, was in a work area fairly near him. And so I he's an early shift sort of fellow, and got to ride to work with him and have lunch with him every day. And he would walk me around to meet people. He would hold my hand and introduce me as his daughter, and I would have to tell people what my name actually was. But it was a lovely summer because I made good money and I got to spend that time in a very different setting with my dad. And then the following summer, that they had implemented programs that said that those jobs are only available to low-income students or children. And they had no idea I had no access to any money my parents might have. So I ended up struggling the next summer. But I worked every summer. And my career goal as a teenager was to emancipate and to never have to rely on my parents for anything, which I didn't achieve until the summer before my senior year. To never have to look back, never have to move back home, never have to be asking for assistance again.
And was that independence something that they instilled in you, or?
Well, I think so. I think that was instilled in my brothers and me. I don't know what motivated them. What motivated me probably more than anything was that my mother was such an unpleasant human being to be around that, it was a career goal to get out of her way and to never have to ask her for help. Mm-hmm. She was just a very bright woman, very nice to people who weren't her family, and pretty much a terrorist in the home. So it felt like a good plan to not be there any more than I had to.
So you're in college.
Mm-hmm.
You've switched your coursework to social work.
Mm-hmm.
Professors that made a profound impact on you?
I think Judy Norland, for certain, in the School of Social Work, at OU, she subsequently became the chair of the department. And I believe she's retired by now, because that was a long time ago. But the enthusiasm she had, and that the things I learned about a profession that I didn't know existed were just, very interesting to me. That whether it was the settlement houses, and I didn't have any interest in doing inner city work or that sort of thing, but I basically just wanted to have an opportunity to help people, and the notion of working with elders in that line of work didn't formulate in my brain until later.
Well, you graduated in what year?
72.
72. Okay, so upon graduation or near graduation,
mm-hmm.
Are you thinking,
oh Lord God, I don't have a job?
Exactly.
Interestingly, back then, the main source of employment I learned as we had job fairs at the college, was then it was called the Department of Institutions, Social and Rehabilitative Services. It was DHS on steroids. DHS when Lloyd Rader was the director, and the legislature had given, besides a dedicated portion of the sales tax in the state, they'd given the hospitals, and they'd given different programs, rehabilitation services, all sorts of things had been glommed on to the basic Department of Public Welfare that had started back earlier in the I think in the 1930s. And we were told straightforwardly by people who came to talk to us about employment opportunities that in order to work at DSRIS, as it was then called, you had to have a letter of recommendation from a legislator, which befuddled me because although I had gone out of my way to vote against Richard Nixon in my senior year, when I turned 21, and I was able to back then, actually, I guess it was after I graduated that I got to vote, but and I was against the war in Vietnam and all those things, but I hadn't thought about the legislature at all, and tried to navigate that and find out, well, who is our legislator from Norman, and got a letter. And then the fellow apparently had no power in the legislature, and he unfortunately subsequently committed suicide. I did not know him personally, but that sort of left me high and dry. And I asked my parents' legislator, and I think it was a Representative Howell in Midwest City, and he said just flatly no, he wasn't about to do that. So I was thinking, okay, I guess I have a problem here. In the meantime, I worked in a nursing home just as a nurse aide after graduation, trying to find a real social work job. And I loved it. I just loved it. I had spent a lot of time with my grandmother when she stayed with us, including when she was, I don't know what were the issues, whether she'd had a heart attack or a stroke, but she would repeat herself, and she told more stories from her early days. She was born in the 1880s, and she would recite poetry and do those sorts of things. But what I realized working as a nurse aide was it's very hard physical work, but I loved the people. And in 72, and well, until the late 80s, many or most of the people who lived in nursing homes in Oklahoma were very much with it. They were often physically able to get up and around, and they just needed certain kinds of either supervision or assistance that now would be provided through home health or other even lesser interventions. But then nursing homes were the principal source. So I worked in a nursing home, and if it hadn't been for the $1.75 an hour salary, I might have stayed there longer. But it was not enough to live on. And I thought I wanted a real social work job. So a friend told me that there was a new program coming into Oklahoma, ULF, food stamps. It was a brand new program in the country, and they were starting it up in Oklahoma County first. And that if I went and spoke to the county administrator, Merle Hill, and sold myself, told him why he should hire me, that he could arrange for that because they needed new workers. And I thought, I couldn't sell Girl Scout cookies as a child. I was embarrassed to ask people to buy Girl Scout cookies. I have no entrepreneurial inclinations or talents. And I thought, this is just real scary. But I went and did it, and he hired me. So I was hired to help put in food stamps in Oklahoma County as my first social work job.
Now, as part of that job, did you have a caseload, or did you meet with people?
I had a caseload. I had a wonderful supervisor, Doris Osby, who helped me. And there was another recent school social work graduate who hired on at the same time. She helped us understand that providing eligibility to people who were in need was the greatest service that we could render. And so we had a caseload in that unit, each of us, of people who were not on public assistance. And in 1972, the salaries sound abysmal then. Of course, state salaries, especially in DHS, even now, are lower than the norm. But the people that I was serving I remember people who made $50 a month junking cars, taking apart cars. And it wasn't a chop shop, but it was to sell cars for scrap and for parts. And lived in little shacks along the riverbank down in what used to be Sandtown. It's now the River Redevelopment Project. And I had widows on $70 a month Social Security widows pensions, living in community camp was a neighborhood, or living in the Chartel Towers, which was a senior high-rise housing. But we would identify their income. In those days, you had to see their Social Security check or whatever their check was, and figure out. I learned then why I should have learned how to figure percentages in junior high math. It was a mystery to me before that, but I learned to do percentages in that job. But I loved the people I worked with. I loved the clients. No matter how boring a life an older person had, just mundane, day-to-day, workaday world, they had at least one interesting story, and that was what they told you. That there were people who were very, very welcoming. If you don't count the very first field visit I made with a more experienced worker when a dog bit me. But, I learned to wear heavy jeans, sturdy shoes, and watch for the dogs. But the experience was just great. And whether it was, going into really questionable neighborhoods, or whether it was trying to talk somebody who had paid taxes all their lives and might have used the commodity program before food stamps, trying to help them understand that, it was not shameful to apply for this assistance, and it might assist them in getting through. But there were lots of interesting older people that I met because of the area of town that I worked and the nature of the program. So I think that may have convinced me early on that I really, really enjoyed working with older people. And I knew nothing about babies. I had never expected, having been raised by my mother, I never anticipated becoming a mother, and didn't know anything about children because I was the youngest. Babysitting, I'd done that with 8 and 12-year-olds and whatever. So I had no interest in doing the daycare and the working with children's programs. But I love working with the older folks. So I worked a year in food stamps, went to a non-public assistant. No, I guess it was a public assistant, social services, social work position. And I got to deal with a lot of children then, and helping parents know about whether it was the daycare services or the early childhood screening, the medical screening, and their immunizations and that sort of thing. And then went from there after a year to a voc rehab social work cooperative project, and worked there for just over a year. It was all in the same building, and I at some point during that time, I realized that, and I told the supervisor for social services division in Oklahoma County DHS office or DSRIS office that they needed to create a group for social services workers that worked specifically with the elders, that there were a lot of people in social services and DSRIS that didn't like old people, didn't want to work with them, only cared about working with children. And there were others of us that were the exact opposite, and that they could save a lot of people a lot of negative experiences, including our clients, likely, if they would have a specialty group. That's what subsequently brought me back to this agency. But after those 3 years in Oklahoma County, after graduating with my bachelor's degree in social work, I split the state. I applied for graduate school and moved to Austin. I never really expected to come back. So
you knew you wanted to get a master's degree.
I figured that out when I was trying to help a family in which the mother, I guess, I don't know who was the primary client, trying to get some education through voc rehab. But it was a multi-generational household with a teenage daughter who'd had a baby, and then her mother and the rest of the children of the grandmother of the baby. And they had a very fractious kind of family relationship. And I tried to do some interpersonal helping with them and tried to help them figure out better ways to work with each other. And I realized that I lacked the skills to go beyond a very rudimentary stage. I studied before I had the sessions with them, and I knew I needed to learn more. At that point, I really thought that I wanted to go into whether it was clinical social work or interpersonal helping when I went to Austin to the University of Texas, and discovered that just wasn't real enough. Working with Texas hysterics didn't move me like working with people who had real survival issues and more mundane problems of getting food on the table and getting assistance and knowing what resources were there.
And you graduated from Austin
in 77.
Okay. So you could go anywhere. Now you could work anywhere.
Yes.
Anywhere.
Anywhere. I said that to myself. I expected to be anywhere except here. As I explained it to people, I had so disliked Oklahoma or living here that I had plotted my escape for 7 years. And when I finally left, I really missed the people. I missed my friends. The summer between my years in graduate school, I had the particular fun of going on a cross-country camping trip. It was a 5-week camping trip with a dear friend from Oklahoma who had a camper. He had a pickup truck. We're still friends. There wasn't a romantic relationship. We barely could survive the friendship after 5 weeks with a camper, but we did 5 weeks of going to every state west of here and British Columbia, and we even went to the island of Victoria on a ferry from western Washington state. But I was specifically shopping for a place to move to, and I'd written letters to little towns in Oregon who never wrote back, and I figured out why on that trip, because they had no post office, barely. I mean, they had just a crossroads and maybe a little store or something. They weren't really towns. But I had longed to live back where there were mountains and trees and not the blistering hot summers and those sorts of things. And what I realized on that trip was there were many beautiful places in the country. There are many beautiful places in the world, but a place was only as cool to live in as the people you knew there. And the best people I knew were in Oklahoma. And I missed my friends. And what I realized also was that in Austin and bigger towns, bigger cities, there were lots of opportunities for parallel play. But in Oklahoma, at least the years that I went to college here and lived here right after graduating, there was almost nothing to do unless you created that fun time with your friends. And so rather than sitting side by side and watching, whether it was a play or a concert or whatever, it was pretty much an interactive experience. And in order to have a good time, you got close to people. Or I did, and I missed them. Of course, I moved back here, and a couple of years later, most of my friends moved out of state, which was ugly. But I was already here and in love with this job, and so it goes. But
so you come back to Oklahoma, and this is around 1977.
Mm-hmm.
And at what point? Are you developing the Adult Protective Services Program?
I guess spring break before I graduated in Austin, I came up to Oklahoma City and I was looking for jobs. I thought I was most interested in sort of the health care side of things, but I knew that because I had worked 3 years at DSRIS that I was entitled to reinstatement as a state employee. So as my fail-safe plan, among the other applications I put in, I came to Oklahoma County and Oklahoma County DSRIS, and the person to whom I spoke was. He was then the assistant county administrator, had been the social services division supervisor, who had done a survey of the social workers back in 1974, I guess. And although I didn't remember, he said Esther. I remember that when we did a survey of the social workers, you said that you thought we should create a special group of people to work with, social workers to work with the elders. And you may be interested to know that the legislature has just passed a bill to create protective services for the elderly. And the very first protective services for the elderly group in the state, social work group, is going to be formed here in Oklahoma City, in Oklahoma County districts. And he said that, the effective date of the legislation was, I don't know whether it was May 1st now or June 1st or July 1st, but he said, so we'll be doing that. Would you be interested in taking, in becoming part of that? And I said, yes, that sounds wonderful, as long as you don't make me supervisor. And because I really wanted to do interpersonal work. I had not taken the systems track or the administration track or whatever they called it at UT Austin. I really liked working with the people. And so I started with that group, and Rita Hutchins was my supervisor. And I don't know what happened or who said what to whom, but I'd been there maybe 3 months, give or take, and I got a call from Kate Gauld at the state office, which I thought of as the land of the living dead, who asked me if we talked for a while, and she'd actually grown up in Austin, and she asked me if I would be interested, since I had a master's degree and blah, 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 I'd be interested in working to help coordinate the program statewide. I'd gone to see her, and that was before DHS was under the merit system. I mean, there was a lot of informality in the hiring and the promotions and whatever at that time, which is totally gone now. But I went to the state office, and I think one of the selling points was that I would hear the hardest issues, the hardest cases, the most difficult things, and be able to assist the local social workers with their cases and put together the policy and work on the legal papers and that sort of thing. So I expected to do that for a little while. I mean, it wasn't like I was expecting to live my entire life in that job. And I'd proved to myself that I would get bored in jobs and move on. But I loved that job, and there was a change in the balance of power within Division of Social Services at the state office, and my boss got strange and started not telling me about it when social workers called in, and I'd find out later that they hadn't gotten the guidance. And we had a few talks, she and I was determined I was going to leave this agency. I wasn't going to, be someone's full-time scapegoat or do something weird. In the meantime, Mr. Keene, who was the head of what was then the Special Unit on Aging, what now is the Aging Services Division, but Roy Keene, I'd been to some of their meetings and spoken to their advisory council and protective services for the elderly, and done various things with his staff. And he called and asked me if I would be interested in talking to him about a brand new program that had been mandated in the Older Americans Act reauthorization of 1978. And when I talked to him, he told me it was an ombudsman position to put together a program of advocacy for elders in nursing homes. It was focused mostly on nursing homes then. It was a grant program, and I would, be sharing a $50,000 grant with the legal services developer. Would I be interested? And I said, yes, So it was like I started in January of 1979 in this job, expecting to be bored in a couple of years, get the program set up, get it underway, and move on to something else. And I haven't been bored a day since, and it's pushing towards an embarrassing 32 years.
Well, in those early years, large staff.
Oh, heck no. And I cleaned that up. We were in the basement. The whole Special Unit on Aging was in the basement of the Will Rogers building, neatly tucked between the women's bathroom and the elevator shaft. We were sort of stepchildren in then still called DISRIS. And it was a good thing because Mr. Keene was a great boss, but I was it. And I traveled the state. At first, I had to figure out what in the world the program was, and contacted. Back then, it was the typewriter with the carbon paper. Although we did have a steno pool, people to type the letters and send them to various other state ombudsman programs. The 1970s, the Ombudsman Program nationwide had been through demonstration projects in different states. And I think every state except Oklahoma had wanted an Ombudsman Program. Perhaps the rumors about Mr. Rader owning shares in nursing homes were true. I don't know. But in addition, DISRIS at the time was the state Medicaid agency. There wasn't a separate state Medicaid agency. So they certified, they paid the nursing homes for their services, and it was me and a telephone and a middle desk and a little glass cubicle, and I traveled the state and did information workshops. By February of 1980, I was ready to do the first. I guess I wasn't doing many information workshops then, but I did my first volunteer training because I realized that if the program went away the next year, because it was a grant, you never know what's going to happen. If it went away the next year, what would matter to people? What would leave a lasting legacy or be of assistance to the residents? What I learned from talking to people around the state and going to public hearings and describing the program was that people didn't know they had rights in nursing homes, and there were really serious problems. People really felt like they were hung out to dry, that they weren't being protected at all, and there was nothing to protect them. I'm trying to think of what my brain did, but in February of 1980, I did my first volunteer training with the help of a community service advisor, Carol Tays, in Enid. The area agencies on aging had identified staff, the 11 area agencies on aging had identified staff around the state to work cooperatively with me to try to get the word out. In some parts of the state, I was coordinating with RSVP volunteer programs, or sometimes the social services. Sometimes the area agency on aging and their outreach workers, or there were the community service advisors, or legal aid, or other people. So it was a very mixed bag. But 40 people showed up on an icy day for this training, and about half of them were nursing home operators, and half were people interested in being volunteers. And, fortunately, because of the snow and ice storm, I was able to say, let's not do this tomorrow, because it was supposed to be a 2-day training. What I learned from that was that the providers had as many questions as the consumers, and they were essentially the same questions. Will you take anonymous complaints? Do you duplicate the health department? What do you do when you hear a complaint? What's the approach? And I had worked on all that and had figured out that if we were going to leave a legacy, it had to be information about people's rights, information about the fact that there was a law, although it was skeletal at the time. Ombudsmen were intended to make up for the fact, or be there as spokespersons for the residents, to help them have someone who focused on them because of the incredible failure of the enforcement system nationwide. the project had, for demonstration grants for our ombudsman, had been born out of the scandals in nursing homes in the, I guess, the early 70s, late 60s. And it was intended to be a voice for the residents, as well as someone to monitor not just the providers of care, not just the nursing homes, but also the alleged enforcement system and the people who were supposed to be inspecting, the people who were supposed to be protecting the rights and well-being of the residents in the nursing homes. Finding out many things the hard way about what went on in nursing homes. The best part of the job for me in those early days was getting to visit old people in nursing homes. I loved that. I can't get out of a nursing home even now in less than 2 hours because I just enjoy hearing from the people, talking to them, and trying to assist them, whether it's with information or just someone to talk to. But the notion of working with volunteers was that we would have a community presence that was a local community presence. What I figured out at some point was that nursing homes are only as good as the community in which they are located demand that they are, and that there are very definite community standards and community expectations that nursing homes will meet if it means that's the only way they get business. It was harder to do. It was harder for the community to have a major impact in those days because there were very few other resources for in-home or community-based care. We didn't have the Advantage Waiver Program. Actually, I helped to write a waiver application back in the early 1980s, but Mr. Rader wouldn't let it move forward. Trying to get in-home and community-based services. There were some personal care services or telephone reassurance, maybe home-delivered meals or senior centers, but there wasn't much else. So people were pretty well trapped with the choice of nursing homes. And there was, I thought, a great need to train local people to go in. It's kind of like the difference between how your house looks if you're not having company or how your house looks if someone's coming. And the inspectors weren't unannounced at that time, even though the law said they should be. And so there were many things that were bad about the system. So I wanted trained volunteers who knew what the residents' rights were, who could help inform people of their rights, and who could assist the residents in either having their problems handled anonymously, or by someone who doesn't identify them, because ombudsmen don't identify the source of their complaints unless we have the person's permission, and also could help them by giving them the courage if they needed it, or the information if they needed it about what their rights were, what the law was, what the rules were, of someone to sit with them face to face with the administrator or the director of nursing or the dietary supervisor and try to resolve the issue. Ombudsmen don't have enforcement authority, and that's one of the joys of the program, because the attempt to cooperatively resolve an issue is often successful. In those early days, people would look at me like I had three heads if I talked about residents' rights, but in 1987, the federal nursing home reform law upgraded residents' rights and quality of life to be equivalent in importance under the law as quality of care. So the whole person who moves into the resident is supposed to be adapted to by the nursing home, as opposed to all the adaptation and adjustment and giving up being done by the person who moves in. So there have been major changes along the way in the way residents are supported in the law and in the rules, but the early days were quite interesting. I think I only almost lost my job once for talking back to someone with a great deal of power in the nursing home industry.
in those early days, were operators, how did operators take this program?
Gerald Smart, who is now deceased, was a great leader within the nursing home industry, and then it was pretty much just the for-profit nursing home industry was the industry here. And he called me Little Bit. It took the chief counsel for DHS or DISRIS back then. He had several, I think he called them late night drinking sessions with Gerald, trying to explain to him that this was a federal law. In order to have all the nice programs that they wanted, like nutrition sites and senior centers, they had to have an ombudsman. And, I had a legitimate right of access to the facility and all that. He was sort of the archetype of the powerful nursing home operator. I think after doing several, dozens probably of information workshops around the state, once I realized that I needed to do those in advance of the volunteer trainings, he invited me to speak to the nursing home convention. It was 1980. It was the heat wave that went on and on, however many days, dozens of days of over 100 degrees. It was in the Myriad. And I remember that Governor George Nye, which didn't give me a comfort, Governor George Nye was the keynote speaker for the Nursing Home Association convention. It was a big, big convention. I was booked in the only room in the place that had no air conditioning during this heat wave. I think it was broken. They may have just turned it off, but it was a room for 300, and I did the same presentation about the Ombudsman Program 2 days in a row. The first day, and I hated public speaking. I was just nervous as a cat, even standing up in class talking. So, my only hope was that I knew more than they did about the program and could therefore maybe present it adequately. But I got up to speak and talked about the program and why it wasn't a duplication of the health department and how we handled complaints and the volunteer component and all these different things. And I took questions. And the very first question from I'll call him a gentleman in the front row, who I learned later had been head of the National Association of Nursing Homes, whatever they called it then, at one point, and was an owner of nursing homes in northeastern Oklahoma. I don't remember his name, but he raised his hand and he said, "Well, young lady, I think you're a very nice young lady, and I think you mean well, but I think your program is stupid and duplicative, and I hope it goes away soon." And I looked at him and I thought, great first question. And so I didn't say anything. And in the back of the room, someone yells, "Repeat the question." And I said, "Repeat the question." And I turned to my handler, who was a very nice lady from a nursing home. And I just rolled my eyes and I said, "Well, the gentleman in the front said that he thought that I was a very nice young lady and he thought that I meant well, but he thinks the program is stupid and duplicative and hopes it goes away soon." And it brought down the house. And of course, it cracked me up because I figured that why not tell them? Because probably, 3/4 to 80, 90% of them were thinking it too. But that sort of broke the ice. And afterwards, I thought it had been because of the stroke that I didn't recognize anybody, but people would come up to me for years and know who I was and talk to me by name and know what I did. And I finally had to start saying, "Do I know you? Oh, no, have we met? Have we been introduced? Oh, no, but I heard you speak in the Myriad back in so people remembered me, and that sort of bridged the gap. But it could be unpleasant. And, and then there were the administrators who tried to co-opt the volunteers. And it was after a year or so, I told my boss, Roy Keene, who was a very supportive, amazing, amazing boss. I'm not training any more volunteers. I'm not doing anything else to expand the program until I get some hired help. And I said, I need someone here to work with me to coordinate the program. And we need to require some staff out at the area agencies on aging. And so Mr. Keene believed in mandates, and there was money going out in Title III, which was the portion of the Older Americans Act for various supportive services, and money was allocated to the area agencies on aging and they got to select the first person, but at least a half-time staff person to work specifically on the Ombudsman Program. And I was able to hire Eleanor Kurtz, who she and I were two halves of one brain. We just were absolutely the program. For 26 years we worked together, and she was actually one of the people that nominated me for this award, which, I think I said it in my presentation when I was inducted, that it just didn't seem right that it wasn't standing side by side with Eleanor, because, but we were like, she had gotten her master's degree from the Center for Studies in Aging in Dallas at North Texas State in Denton. And she had taken the administration track, but she had taken the nursing home administration track. And she had worked in every part of a nursing home in her internship. And she actually thought that she wanted to do that, but then she thought, she needed to see the other side and wanted to be a nursing home inspector, because what she realized was the nursing homes in Oklahoma were inspected and treated very differently than they were in Texas, and she wanted to try to clean that up. Well, she didn't get hired on there, but she was a perfect match, a much nicer human being than I, and taught me a lot, just personally, as well as her analytic skills, her ability. She is a very person-oriented individual, and we balance each other, I think, very well. And she finally left because there's just no money in the Ombudsman Program. But after 26 years, she hung in there a long time. But Eleanor and I helped to work to train a staff around the state. It wasn't too many years before we realized, and those people were doing the volunteer recruitment, volunteer training that we taught them to do. We worked on complaints with those local staff. They were only half-time at the time. Most of them worked far more than half-time for piddly salary. And we were eventually able to get full-time staff in the mid to late 80s.
You mentioned before a staff person was hired in your department that operators would co-op volunteers. Could you explain what that means?
I think the point at which I realized I needed local supervisors for volunteer ombudsmen, and desperately, was when I got a call from a volunteer, one of the first volunteers I trained. I believe she was in Holdenville, and I'm not quite sure who told me, whether she told me this or whether someone else told me, but she was actually filling in for the administrator, sitting behind the administrator's desk while the administrator was off for a few days. And I thought, oh, that ain't good. I mean, that is not acceptable. That is so wildly inappropriate for an advocate for the resident. This was before the Older Americans Act spoke to conflicts of interest very specifically, but it was very clear to me that the advocate isn't there to be an adversary for the facility, but it certainly isn't there to be the operator. The advocate is not there to be the operator of the facility. And the advocate, the ombudsman, in a classic sense, an ombudsman is, in the Swedish model, is absolutely neutral and is an informal go-between, or a formal go-between, a bridge for communication between in the original sense, the citizens and the government. In a university, it'd be between the students and the administration, or whatever, prison, whatever your setting. In the Ombudsman Program, in the Older Americans Act, the ombudsman, long-term care ombudsman, is clearly there as an advocate for the resident and to intervene on the resident's behalf, with the resident's permission only, and to be a spokesperson for, as well as to identify issues that affect the residents either individually or in a widespread group, and make recommendations for the resolution of those kinds of issues or correction of problems. We are not there to take over the facility, and we are certainly not there to tell the residents what they should want or what they may have. And we're not there to tell the staff, to direct the staff. We're there to inform the staff, encourage the staff, put the staff on notice if need be that violations are occurring and giving them an opportunity to correct those, or we'll make a referral. But we're not there to be the administrator or the director of nursing or the dietary supervisor or the nurse aide nor the laundress. We are not there to take the resident to the bathroom or to change her clothes or to help her get into or out of bed. We are not there to provide hands-on service. I had never even conceived of a volunteer ombudsman that I'd trained thinking that it was appropriate for her to sit for the administrator. And so that was my moment of truth that this is not going to happen again. I did learn some things about program management and protecting the program in order to be able to serve and protect the residents in those early days. In fact, one of the early attacks came from someone that I thought was on the same team, someone who investigated complaints against nursing homes in the Medicaid program. And he said, you better protect your program, little girl. And so what I learned was, because he was accusing some informants to the program, just complainants, not even volunteers, he was accusing them of having done some things that interfered with an investigation that he was carrying on, and his unit was carrying on with the FBI, that I had no knowledge of. We were just investigating complaints that were brought to us and referring them. I had referred these complainants to him, actually, in his unit. Instead, he was all up in arms because they were ombudsmen. And I was able to prove, fortunately, that they weren't, because I had done letters of introduction that we call a certification for the volunteers who had been trained, and was able to defend what the program status was relative to these complainants. In fact, the operator of the facility they were complaining about did go to federal prison and had to divest himself of his facilities. This was back in 1980. Robert J. Stevens was the operator, but these were just women from the community who had loved ones in Huckel's nursing home in Kingfisher that was operated by this fellow who had 23 facilities around the state. I think it was 23. But figuring out ways to protect the program was something I hadn't anticipated having to do, but I was glad I had that early training, because there are other states who didn't do adequately to identify who was an official volunteer for the program and who wasn't. And so we did letters of introduction that became certification notices and could keep track of them. But that was the point in time when I said I need local supervision for the volunteers, in addition to the assistance of recruitment and setting up trainings and all the logistics, which take time and take staff, supervision of volunteers rose to a higher level of importance for me, besides just them being able to call me and my seeing them on occasion when I could, drive out to whatever remote location they were in. We had volunteers, I think, in Enid and Holdenville for a brief time, Durant and some other places there at first. But that was when we got half-time staff at the area agencies on aging.
In those early years, you're trying to figure everything out. Mm-hmm. Who would you go to for help or guidance, or is it just learning on your own?
It was mostly learning on our own. There was now there's a National Ombudsman Resource Center. There was a loose network of ombudsmen around the country, and I could, at times, ask for assistance. It is more of my nature to puzzle something through and come up with a solution that fits the situation locally. Every state was different. Every state still is different. Some state ombudsman programs are in state government. Some are in freestanding agencies. Some are parts of legal groups and other things. But there was no focused resource. I was able to join the first year I was state ombudsman, the National Citizens Coalition for Nursing Home Reform, also known as NCNR, and now called National Consumer Voice for Quality Long-Term Care. They had an annual meeting, and I went there the first year, I guess in May or so, and I thought, oh my God, I learned about issues I didn't even know were issues. Fortunately or unfortunately, that's happened every year since that I've been able to go. There's always something breaking on some poor practice or some dire problem that breaks out on one of the coasts. Generally, it takes a while to make it to Oklahoma, just like fashions. And the learning about how the different states handled that. But we did form a National Association of State Long-Term Care Ombudsman Programs, and I don't know if I was the second or third president of that. I know I did 2 terms broken by a period of time, but that was before. It was before fax machines. It was before I even dreamed of having a secretary or an administrative assistant all to my own, and it was also before email. So it was the long, hard way to do anything. But we tried to organize so that we could put pressure on, and that we could interface with, not just put pressure on, but interface with the Administration on Aging in Washington, part of Health and Human Services, to whether it was to get regulations written, get support for the programs that were being attacked in their own states by whether it was a governor's office or a state legislature or the agency that they were placed in. There were all sorts of things befalling ombudsmen because the program easily and readily becomes a political embarrassment when you're, essentially pulling the skirts up of state government saying, here's what the law says you should be doing to protect the citizens of the state who live in these facilities, and this is how you're failing to do that. And so protecting the ombudsman as they're trying to be advocates and do just their job that's in the federal law, very clearly in federal law. So trying to get amendments to the Older Americans Act when it was reauthorized, and it is reauthorized periodically, trying to get the Administration on Aging to stand up for state ombudsman programs, whether it's your own or someone else's, makes no difference. It's, those points of vulnerability affect you as well as others. So there were, we started with the local staff, very small, and it was just the biggest blessing. But of course, when you have staff, then you have to be an administrator, which is not, of course, my favorite thing to do. So But we implemented then and still do quarterly meetings to bring the ombudsman in. They were the only people they knew. I was the only person I knew doing this kind of work in the entire state for a year and a half until Eleanor started in September of 1980. I knew what it was like to feel alone and be the odd person out in a big way. And so bringing the ombudsman in, the area staff in for support, training, as well as the mental health needs to communicate to someone you could talk to about issues that were very confidential was an important component for the program for me, but it's proved to be a very unifying force. I don't think it should be an accident of birth what kind of services you get from an ombudsman program in what part of the state or what part of the nation for that matter. But there is, I think, more continuity and more teamwork in our program because of the ways in which we brought the people in. And actually, they helped, like the volunteers did initially, wanting a letter of introduction. They've helped to create their own forms. I would just say, this is what I need from you. This is how often I need it. It's up to you to design what works for you for collecting that information. We had a complaint form, and we had just the quarterly report form of what had the information they had to gather. They created their own forms, and then they decided they wanted uniform forms. So the program was sort of a living, breathing thing, and still is, because they still have a lot of input and guide the work of the program.
Complaints in the early days versus complaints today.
Oh.
How many on average?
Oh, numbers. See, the program, I think, works, 6,000 to 9,000 problems. The volunteers are not required to make a formal complaint out of everything. They do a lot of informal problem solving. The goal of the program, I could have started there, but the goal of the program is to, in my way of thinking, is to help the resident get what she wants. Help the resident, if there's a problem or a question, get it resolved at the earliest possible time frame, at the smallest possible stage before it becomes a huge gaping wound, whether literally or figuratively. So that if you can answer someone's question or get them connected to the right person in the facility to answer their question before it becomes a complaint, before it becomes a problem, that works for me. So provision of information to consumers, provision of information to the providers of, these are the things I'm seeing in your facility. You might want to take a look at Hall 4 and what the afternoon shift is doing instead of keeping people cleaned or whatever. Or I'm hearing a lot more things on this wing than this wing about food service or them getting assistance to eat if they're eating in their rooms or whatever it is. If you can give that information and head off a complaint, yay. The goal is not to, cause a big scene or to get the facility in trouble with the state. We give them an opportunity to work cooperatively with us to prevent or resolve problems. I think in the early stages, we kept the complaint log with the hash marks and on a grid that we created with pen and ink on sideways legal size paper. And I'm real proud it worked. But it was, everything was by hand then. I think we got our first computer sometime in the may have been the 1990s. I got my first desktop in 1998. But we used the mainframe for some complaint entry for our annual report, but it was just not the same environment that it is now with a computer in every purse, and you do all of your own work. But I can't even say. I think the first annual report that Eleanor and I published In 2003, there may have been, not 2003, 1983, the first text report was, there may have been 400 and something complaints that rose to that level, and that was with just the early stages of half-time staff. In 1980, after the passage of the Nursing Home Care Act in Oklahoma, that Representative Don McCorkle and Senator Bernice Kane authored, and the Oklahoma Alliance on Aging was created as an advocacy organization to get passage of that law. That created an opportunity for the Ombudsman Program and a requirement that other state agencies that inspected or investigated complaints in nursing homes in Oklahoma had to forward complete copies of their inspection or complaint reports to the state ombudsman office. And so we took that to mean that we were intended to be a clearinghouse of information. And we also thought that intended for us to provide information to those agencies about what we saw in their reports, as well as putting that in a document for public consumption. What we learned in that, and that was the first year that we wrote as an issue, because we do systems advocacy as well as personal advocacy and provision of information. One of our most important systems issues was the failure of the state to enforce. And from the written record, from their own inspection reports, the ombudsman would see problems with care, with service delivery, would get complaints. The Special Medical Services Unit, that now is called Long-Term Care Investigations of Adult Protective Services, it's another part of DHS, they would find, 4 untreated bed sores and a person who hadn't been taken to the hospital after a fall, and cockroaches and whatever else. And the health department inspection would say, well, there was some cigarette butts left in an ashtray in the hall, and that area was messy and hadn't been cleaned. And we would hear these terrible complaints about lack of personal hygiene care. The nurse aides didn't know what they were doing. There were many times when nurse aides would pull people up by their arms and leave bruises, or not clean someone up after they were taken to the toilet, or just not taken to the toilet. And so we began to work on those issues. For nurse aides actually supervised 2 out of 3 shifts in Oklahoma nursing homes, as opposed to in other states where they had nurses around the clock. We had intermediate care facilities that had been created to allow a nurse to be on duty 7 days a week in the day shift, and then a certified medication aide who was actually just trained by the Nursing Home Association, who didn't have any basic nurse aide training to begin with, was in charge of the facility the rest of the time. And so we started working on, as an issue, getting nurse aides trained. It took a decade. It took the entire decade in the 1980s and an act of Congress to get nurse aides training in Oklahoma. Even though some of the providers were for it, there was the Board of Health that had created a committee to work on it. And the Commissioner of Health then, Joan Levitt, until her attorney told her she had to let me speak, I would not even have gotten to speak to them about, the fact that this committee did recommend nurse aide training to be required, and she wouldn't let it come to a vote of the board. And the board wouldn't stand up to have it happen. So we wrote that up many times in our annual report. We identified the health department many times in our report. We sometimes could get DHS as the Medicaid agency until that was taken away from them in 1995 and the Healthcare Authority created. We could get regulations written or enforced by DHS that paid the nursing homes the Medicaid money to improve staffing or this or that. But it was slogging in the streets. It was slogging through the legislature, bill after bill that was introduced at our request or the senior group's request to get nurse aides trained or to get proper enforcement. We turned in the lack of enforcement and the various pieces of evidence, the huge library of evidence that we could produce to the Attorney General's Medicaid Fraud Control Unit as soon as they were created in the late 80s. Of what are you going to do about the health department? Look at this stuff. What are you going to do about these issues? I talked to every Fed I ever met, whether it was in Washington or in Dallas, anyone I could find on the phone, of what are you going to do about the health department? They're not enforcing the rules. These are the rules. Now we have this wonderful new law. It means nothing. Laws are not self-affecting. They have to be caused, to go into effect. They have to be enforced. And we had zip from the health department. And we had various things going on. And finally, I don't know whether it was because I was handing out the HHS tips hotline number to widely throughout the state. I was on email doing that too, because there were new networks in the late 90s. But I don't know how it came about that the FBI was involved. The Health and Human Services Office of Inspector General opened a field office in Oklahoma City. They were involved, and the Attorney General's Medicaid Fraud Control Unit, as well as the U.S. Attorney, were involved. And finally, the denouement, the most wonderful moment was May 2nd, 2000, when Brent Van Meter, the Deputy Commissioner of Health, was hauled off in handcuffs from the State Health Department, subsequently indicted and went to federal prison for solicitation and acceptance of bribes from nursing homes. One of Gerald Smart's boys, John Smart, Jim Smart went to federal prison on the same charges for buying off Brent. We had been chronicling nursing homes that had multiple verified complaints, nursing homes with multiple enforcement actions taken against them in our annual report, in appendices for years, had finally started putting in the names of the owners in an appendix, trying, in the absence of enforcement of the laws and rules, we worked through public humiliation, public embarrassment. The annual report was probably misused by the media because they would say that the top 10 or whatever worst nursing homes in the state, when in fact it was just the most complained about facilities in the state. It wasn't necessarily the worst ones, but there was a lot of satisfaction that came when the health department was purged, and some of the people who were the most corrupt were just eliminated. Some of them took plea deals, some of them went to prison, but nursing home operators that Brent Van Meter would close a residential care facility, sell the residents to Doug Giles. They would sort of launder them in the money laundering scheme of things through a residential care facility and maybe to another one, and then to his nursing home at Oak Hills and Jones that he had bought illegally with he used his daughter as a front man. There were all these different webs of intrigue and intricacy, and there was just so much satisfaction seeing some of those people, actually held to account. See the day after the May 2nd arrest, which happened, around between 4 and 5 o'clock or so. We were in the office still, Eleanor and I, because we always worked late. And I got a call from the media, who one of the reporters, who said, "Well, what's going on, Esther, at the health department?" I said, "What are you talking about?" I think it was Nick Hinton from the Tulsa World. And he told me what had happened, and I was just shrieking with delight because it was so long in coming. It was so long in coming. And the subsequent years for the changing of the guard at the health department and the purging. I called it the pogrom because they just removed so many people. But there have been good things come since. I couldn't even tell you the number of complaints we worked that year. There were people who said, finally, there's someone around to do something about these issues we've been having for all these years in the nursing homes. I've been having the Ombudsman staff do monthly media releases for 20 years, but there's still people who don't know about the program. But there are also people who wouldn't make complaints because they didn't think anyone would do anything. And so the amount of public information that got out there during that year. The other remarkable thing was that after so many years of having people at the Capitol look at me like I had three heads, because I go almost every day to the legislature during session to keep the nursing homes, the for-profit nursing homes, from taking over everything, getting everything they want. And the Aging Network is terrific in the advocacy that they do to block certain things or advocate for certain things. But the day after the arrest, I had my vindication because people suddenly said, oh my God, she was right. She wasn't just making all that stuff up that gave us so much grief from all the nursing home operators who probably were begging for me to be fired or trying to figure out a way to upend the program or to stop us from doing what we did. But the important thing was that I was asked what I wanted in some statutes and some bills that were there that year, and got requirements for the health department to have rules on conflict of interest themselves, and try to require them to have an actual protocol for what they did when they received a complaint. There were many things, many legislative changes that we got in that year and the few years after. I fear that those lessons have been forgotten 10 years later, but that was exciting times in the Ombudsman Program.
You were probably, I'm guessing, pretty early on, realizing the corruption at the state level. Did you ever think something would ever become of it? Or was it just a matter of time? It's almost like you were fighting on one hand, and it's hard for change to happen because...
It is hard for change to happen. It doesn't have to be hard for change to happen, especially when the law is already written that tells you what that change is and should be or shall be. I'm an optimistic person. I actually said to someone, it may have been a director of the agency once, that if I weren't an optimist, I would have thrown myself off a tall building years ago. But I have no suicidal tendencies, fortunately, but just a dogged determination that if something is wrong, I'm going to say it's wrong. I'm not paid to describe the emperor's new clothes if he's walking down the street naked. And no one at the Capitol or anywhere in the state is as scary as my mother was. So in facing down those people who were trying to do this or that, it's a matter of, I guess it's the sense of having the moral high ground, which is a great motivator for me. And the people that we serve, the point of all this is that, during the 10 years of trying to get nurse aid training as a requirement in Oklahoma nursing homes and actually get it implemented, there were still individuals living in nursing homes, lying in their own waste, who weren't being taken to the toilet, who weren't having their hands washed before meals, who weren't properly positioned in bed. Those people still needed the individual advocacy. The systems advocacy can't take the place of that. So while you're trying to move the mountain, you're still doing the one step at a time in each nursing home, because each of those residents is entitled to be treated with dignity and respect and some kindness and some consideration for their human needs. There's no excuse to not do that, even if it's not required in law. That's a human being thing that should be a personal requirement. I will say that we were gaining ground within DHS in the Medicaid program. The federal law that changed, the Federal Nursing Home Reform Law, we call it OOHRP 87, it's part of the Omnibus Budget Bill in 87 in Congress. There were requirements for the feds to create enforcement standards. And for the first time, there were going to be intermediate sanctions, money penalties, the placement of a temporary manager, things that we had in our state law since 1980, like the petitioning the court to place a receiver to take over operation of a very badly running facility or an abandoned facility to protect the residents while a smoother transition could be arranged. Those things, the feds were supposed to write rules for implementation, and if they didn't, by 1991, I think was the cutoff, the states were obliged to do it, and they were empowered in the federal law. It took us a couple years, but we were working on that with the Medical Services Division, I think we called it, of DHS, and Legal Division, and we wrote enforcement standards. All of us worked together on it side by side. Howard Pilata, who's now the chief legal counsel for Healthcare Authority, was part of that, and Charlie Waters, who's general counsel for DHS, was there. But we worked on rules and put them through the rulemaking process, and they got through the legislative review, and Governor Walters vetoed them at the encouragement of Brent Van Meter. And so I had the interesting position of being quoted in the paper, in opposition to the governor. Fortunately, my boss is not an appointed official, and nor am I. But unfortunately, my boss was Roy Keane, who never looked at me funny unless we stopped pushing. Never told Eleanor and I we shouldn't, or we would get in trouble if we did our jobs. But when we were working on those enforcement rules, which we never got past Governor Walters, who was subsequently charged for taking campaign contributions illegally from the nursing home industry, by the way, we had Eleanor and I had a conversation with Charlie Waters, general counsel, and he wanted to talk with us in person. He said, now you guys understand that, this is a process and it takes some time. So I don't want you to be disappointed if we come to the end of the year and we don't have those rules through the process yet. And I said, Charlie, if we have them in place a year from now, we're going to count it as a win. And he looked at us and he said, you guys are scary. You're like the Viet Cong. You never go away. And I thought, yeah, there's a lot, Chinese water torture could describe us too. Drip, 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 drip. And if you keep on saying the same thing, I've learned, after a while, people forget who said it. If you have no concern, no interest on who gets credit, if the change happens, if the positive growth occurs, yay. It doesn't have to be the Ombudsman Program getting credit. I don't care about that at all. I want the residents to get what they need and what they want. That's the point. That's the whole point of the program. So,
well, tell me how large your staff is today and what it encompasses.
For quite a few years, we have hovered around 200 volunteers, certified volunteers. We ask a lot of them. And they are the heartbeat of the program because the trained volunteers are certified ombudsmen. They visit a particular assigned facility at least 2 hours a week. Many of them spend many more hours. they're there whether or not there are problems. They visit the residents and get to know the residents and the facility and the staff and their policies. And they can assist the residents. The residents know they'll be back, so they can trust them. And they work through thousands of problems a year. And they are considered, under the Government of Tort Claims Act, they're considered state employees for purposes of their civil immunity for good faith performance of their duties. They have training requirements. They have monthly meetings for continuing education and supervision that their ombudsman supervisors provide. And those volunteers are amazing what they do. And we have everyone from nurses or retired nurses. We had an assistant district attorney once, but some of them are attorneys, some of them are housewives, some of them are hardware sales. It doesn't matter what your frame of reference is if they care about the residents and will do the work. The staff, the paid staff at the area agencies on aging, there are 24 area ombudsman staff positions at the 11 area agencies on aging. In 2000, interestingly, after the arrest of Brent Van Meter, the nursing home provider fee was enacted, and money for 10 additional area ombudsman staff was placed in that law for this program. And so starting in 2000, we were able to hire 10 additional people that brought us up to 24 staff. Each of those staff is located, they're employees of the area agencies on aging. They're around the state in the 11 area agencies on aging. And they generally have 2,500 to 3,000 beds that they cover. Our occupancy rate isn't that high in Oklahoma, so it varies how many residents they see, but they visit multiple facilities, generally over a multi-county area, and make routine visits, complaint investigations, and as well as doing the volunteer supervision, the recruitment, the training, the public presentations, and in-service trainings for staff. They are Renaissance people. They do many, many things, and they do them very well. And at the State Ombudsman Office, there are 6 of us total, including me. 2 of them are support staff who maintain the files, the databases. We have a lot of reporting to do on the nursing home provider fee and other things. And I have 2 field representatives who supervise half the state each, and the deputy state ombudsman. And we're just actively involved in all sorts of aspects of whether it's the personal advocacy, the provision of information, or the development of ways to address systems-wide issues.
So the reluctant administrator is still administering?
Oh God, yes. I like going out to long-term care facilities and visiting with the older people. I so seldom get to actually darken the door of a nursing home anymore. It's pathetic. But I take those occasions where I can get them. And I get to work with elders in the State Council on Aging, the Oklahoma Alliance on Aging, OOHRP volunteers, the Silver-Haired Legislature. The Oklahoma Aging Partnership is a partnership of the different groups that work as aging advocates. And so we work on legislative issues together or regulatory issues. And those are very great allies and very active, very, very thoughtful and hardworking retirees. I'm terrified to retire because I see what can happen to you. I think they work harder. They work more hours a week, I suspect. Well, I don't know if they work more hours a week, but when I retire, I hope to actually get to retire. There's a theory.
Well, we learn the tools for what we do in our career in different places. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's on the job or in school. Or mm-hmm. Where are some of the places you have found that you have learned the tools you needed for this job?
Oh, interesting. I think tools. I don't know if I call them tools or skills. I learned a lot about I guess the problem-solving process is a textbook-style social work tool or system of thought in which you partialize a problem and you try to identify all the different issues or items within a problem and identify what your goal is. If it were right, what would it look like? And to then develop a strategy to address those different partialized portions of the problem. That's actually the model we use for complaint investigation or for complaint resolution in the Ombudsman Program in Oklahoma. And I think it works extremely well because when people bring a complaint or a problem, they're often overwhelmed by it. And to talk through with them or to listen to them as they describe it, is all the food bad, or is it, breakfast is great, but lunch and supper, blah, blah. Okay, now if it were right, what would it be like? What do you want to work on first? Do you want to work on that with me? Do you want me to do that speaking up for you? Or do you want to take it from here and empowering people? The notion of empowering people to be their own advocates is another very basic social work premise. And I think that those have stood well in the program. They're part of all of what we do, whether it's personal or systems advocacy. I would say this, my father, because of the walks in the woods, looking at the tiniest little sign of an animal or a seedling tree or identification of those small things within the larger pattern, taught me a lot about observation skills. And I also learned vigilance just trying to stay out of my mother's way, but that's another story. So the being tuned into what's going around you is important in the nursing home setting and complaint investigation. It's also very important in the legislative advocacy and the regulatory advocacy and working through a system and trying to pull together all the different strings that may attach to the problem. Those as well as, people skills. I learned a lot from Eleanor, just truly a lot from Eleanor. And the learning the teamwork, I don't know if that was learned or second nature, but the teamwork that's required to resolve an issue. No one person can do it. That's one of my concerns about the Oklahoma Women's Hall of Fame. I am just the front man for the organization. There are so many things going on. There are so many people doing so many terrific things in the program that, to the extent that the recognition goes to the program, I'm okay with this.
I hear that from all of the inductees.
Oh, good.
You're all so humble.
I don't think it's humility. I think it's reality. I mean, there's no, I don't know. I mean, perhaps it's trite by now that it takes a village. There's not one person that can do major social change. You may become people's lightning rod, or, well, if she can stand up to him, I can sort of point to look at and to take some kind of either comfort or strength, or look at that idiot, what she's doing. She's going to be dead before long. I don't know what it is, but I know that I've gotten a lot of feedback directed at me over the years that I know is not mine alone. It belongs to the program and the wonderful people, the thousands of people who've served as ombudsman volunteers and the people who have spread the word about residents' rights. I mean, when the first time after probably 10 years in the program, heard a nursing home administrator's voice on the phone calling me to complain about something a city council was doing and that it violated the residents' rights. And I was going, I'm sorry, I've crossed over into the parallel universe where everything is right and just and true. I'm lost here. I didn't say it out loud, though.
That's a good feeling.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. When people forget that you were the enemy and start talking like you, even if it's self-serving, it's, it's progress.
Well, tell me about, we've touched probably upon some of this, but any major stumbling blocks or adversity you faced along the way?
Oh, yeah. And I think that, those people who, fortunately, I was protected as far as not knowing who might be trying to get me fired this week or that week. Because Mr. Keene, even when there was a full frontal assault on my job, didn't tell me till a year later. I was grateful for that. The resistance from a very powerful industry was the biggest stumbling block. And the fact that so many people, including people in authority in other parts of the agency that I work in, believed them and thought that, every nursing home operator was well-intentioned and doing the best they could, and I was asking the impossible. There were many ways in which we were, I might even go to the word punished for doing what was our law as it's stated in federal law, what our job was as stated in federal law and state law, which is to identify issues, make recommendations, whether it's in the facility or in the legislature, to policymakers and others, and to advocate for the people we serve. There were attacks from the provider organization, the Nursing Home Association, and we would get challenged on this or that, and we'd end up having to write Eleanor and I memos and pull together. We kept such good documentation and had, the arsenal of information to support our perspective, but stumbling blocks could be as simple as having to do it all yourself without a secretary, and we've re-entered that phase of the world where everyone's expected to do their own work on the computer, but the having time to answer the phone, for heaven's sake, because for quite a few years, Eleanor and I had one telephone, the black desktop that we shared with our metal desks crammed together in the little cubicle. And you don't even think of it as a stumbling block until later you think back, how did you deal with that? But there were many attacks, and part of the biggest barrier was knowing what the law said and not being able to get it enforced, not being able to get it done. I don't have a place in my brain or to formulate how people think when they're that corrupt, that their personal financial gain is more important than literally the skin on the back of another human being. That it's okay for someone to suffer and die, to be neglected, whether it's strangled in their bed rails or whether it's, just lose all hope because of the indignities that they face through just poor care. You don't have to die to have serious harm come to you in the hands of a bad facility, and how anyone could place money over the well-being of fellow human beings is totally beyond my ken. I cannot wrap my head around it. I have come to a point of belief that I might as well forgive people, and I try to practice, some of these people that have really caused harm to others and terrible suffering, including suffering to their loved ones who had to place them in a nursing home. That I've come to believe that, you know, the great wheel of karma grinds slow, but it grinds exceeding fine. I don't necessarily believe that people are punished after death, but, you know, I just have to believe that there's some kind of eternal justice, there's some kind of justice, and that I might as well not hold personal grudges or eat myself up with individuals and their wrongs. But I have had occasion, especially in the last 10 years, to rejoice very happily in people being taken out of the business. If they're not caregivers, they shouldn't be in the business. They should go sell cars, you know, do whatever. Make your money. Don't do it on the backs of old people.
Well, that's a good way for us to move into career highs.
Oh.
What are some career highs?
I think you can't beat the career high of Brent Van Meter being hauled off in handcuffs. I still have the videotape, although I'm not sure we have a machine any longer that'll run it. Career high of being able to get a staffing bill passed. I mean, there have been many, many little ones. I have, or I guess they were big ones, but getting I have to call it recognition for the program, not for me, with the Women's Hall of Fame, was absolutely an unexpected career high and just sort of mind-boggling. But the joy of Dub Giles being convicted for buying and warehousing residents of nursing homes, and the jail sentence for getting Brent Van Meter out of the health department. I told the FBI agent who was the agent in charge of the investigation that he didn't even have to convict him. It didn't matter to me how much time he served. The fact that they got him out of this position at the health department was the most wonderful thing that they could have done as law enforcement officials. And, you know, being able to have someone else with bigger guns or greater power or a different approach be able to intervene and, you know, have that much impact. That's just huge. It'll always be one of my favorite memories.
Well, moving on to the Oklahoma Women's Hall of Fame, did you know Eleanor was going to nominate you?
Had no clue. Of course, I didn't tell her the FBI was investigating Brent Van Meter either. I mean, when we're told to keep something quiet, we're ombudsmen. We know how to do confidentiality. I had no clue. I got the phone call and was just blindsided.
What was going through your head when you got the call?
You have to be kidding. You have to be kidding. I thought first it couldn't possibly be true. I don't know many people who do practical jokes of that sort. I mean, I was oblivious to the award being out there, although I'd heard of the Hall of Fame. Totally taken aback. I think I may have said, "You've got to be kidding. You making this up?"
Well, you were inducted in 2003. Do you remember much from the ceremony? I remember having people that I really cared about able to come, and I was surprised by some of the folks who came. Ruth Nee, who had worked in the Administration on Aging in the when the program was being created. She may be the grandmother of the Ombudsman Program. She passed away just within the last couple of years, but she lived in Virginia. I had met her in Washington and talked to her over the years. She was retired, I think, by the time I became state ombudsman. But she came to the ceremony. It was a surprise to me. She came with Elma Holder, who was the founder of the National Citizens Coalition for Nursing Home Reform, who was actually a Yukon girl who had retired to Yukon, and I had invited her.
But people I worked with, as well as personal friends, were able to come, and I remember just how neat it was to see them and to have them there, and how terrifying. I mean, I had spoken in the House chamber before because we have Senior Day at the Capitol, and I have the tail pinned on me to talk about legislation. And that part wasn't as mind altering as just the whole, the weirdness of the situation of being honored in that way. And Eleanor introduced me, but I think I said then, Eleanor should be up here with me receiving this award because we have two halves of one brain. We were just, Tweedledum and Tweedledee, I guess. But I remember, and of course I have pictures, photographic evidence that I actually wore a dress, which doesn't happen very often. But I have some visceral memories of the occasion. Just it was surreal. It was surreal.
Well, what does this type of honor mean to you?
Well, it's hard to not take it personally when people say such nice things about you. And as I said, I mean, I know how to do a head-on fight. I know how to do the trench warfare. Having people being nice is a very different thing, especially nice in public and in such a big way. It's a huge honor, and it's also, in a strange way, maybe not strange, a comfort that I think that I have said in other settings, in other contexts, that there's just something to be said for being appreciated. And that was just a huge statement that what I'd been doing had value and that I had done it well. And you made me cry. It was 7 years ago, and it can still make me cry to think about.
Okay. How do you feel that now, even though you may not think so, that people look to you as a role model?
Was it too simple to say it creeps me out? I've had people tell me that, and it is, and it's just mind-boggling. It's very strange. I mean, I try to do a good job of what I do because I really care about the people we serve. And if that comes across to some people as being worth modeling after, I guess that's okay, but it still befuddles me.
Well, you've mentioned many people throughout your interview. Would you like to say anything about those that have played a key role?
Without crying. Roy Keane, I've mentioned, who was my boss for 16 years. He died in 2005. He was a huge part of the success of the Ombudsman Program because he understood advocacy. He understood that it made people uncomfortable. He understood that he understood the importance of the program as far as advocating for people who were otherwise essentially powerless, and totally supported Eleanor and me individually, but also just the whole notion of the program and what a political embarrassment it could be if he chose to see it in that way. And he was he was a huge part of the success of, was for me and for the program. A different boss may have fired me the first year for doing the job, but Mr. Keene knew the purpose and supported it and wanted it done, wanted it to be successful. Never said no. It was shocking. Of course, Eleanor, I've mentioned Eleanor more than once, Eleanor Kurtz, and she's just so much a part of the history of the program, my personal history. She's a person with him. I would trust Eleanor with my life. And just as far as being a committed professional, she's a shining example of how to do a job right, and how to just grab on and take it as it comes, but always caring about the people that we serve. Those two have been fundamental. There are so many aging advocates that taught me things, whether it was on purpose or accidental, about how to use the variety of skills and backgrounds that folks come with to the table, and whether Leslie Kelly, who was a school principal, I think maybe elementary school principal, but she was the poster child. I told her she was the poster child for old ladies with broken hips, because she never missed a meeting. She was there without a walker because she didn't want to be seen with a walker. She was at the Capitol every day with me, to tiny little bird-like woman, and she would face down anybody, but very polite, but just some of those very strong, stalwart advocates, and there are too many to list all. But whether they were working on end-of-life decision-making rights, like Horace Bliss and others back in the early 80s, and trying to say that people should have a right to say how they die, and have a right to dignity and respect. There's just countless older people that have been there every step of the way, and people who now are ombudsman staff and volunteers. There are staff that have been with the program for over 20 years, that remain committed to the service we provide. And there's volunteers who ended up going into nursing homes. They were with the program so long, and they became residents themselves. There's just a vast number of people that have had influence on me. Of course, in the professional world is what I'm talking about now. But the joy of the people that we work with is it's just endless. Being a supervisor, being someone who has to be an administrator, whether or not she's cut out for the job, and I've tried to make that as painless for myself as possible, but being able to work to be part of creating a team, and encouraging people to give me honest feedback, and to give me the benefit of their knowledge, their perspective, their ideas, makes my life just richer and better in all those different ways that you can imagine.
Well, I know you're a transplant Oklahoman.
Mm-hmm.
What does Oklahoma mean to you? You've been here for quite some time.
Mm-hmm. Oklahoma is home. I may be perplexed and antagonized at times by some of the political choices made widely in the state, but as far as a love for the state, a love for the people, I have been at many national conferences and have just been really proud to be able to say what Oklahomans have done, what laws we've passed, what kinds of advocates we have in this state, as well as just my personal friends. I just think the people of the state of Oklahoma are terrific. I also I always wanted to live in the country, and I bought land in southern Logan County, south of Guthrie, and I couldn't move if I was paid to move. The intimate relationship with those several acres and that forest, those, that spring of water, those animals, those birds, that's what, that nurtures my soul in a different way than the work does. And I don't even know if I could move to town. I don't know, when I'm very elderly, the prospect of having to move to town is kind of daunting. But there are things about the Oklahoma countryside that, although I may not have found it beautiful when I moved here, I find it beautiful now. And I mean, even no man's land, even the Panhandle, certainly the mountains, but the state of Oklahoma is home to me.
Well, if you could give any words of wisdom to Oklahomans, what would you tell them?
Words of wisdom to Oklahomans. Well, as in the context of the Ombudsman Program, I would say, and maybe this is just as a human being, trust your guts. If something doesn't seem right, it likely isn't. Don't be afraid to speak up. Stand up for what you believe in. The importance of being, of having integrity, of being true to what you believe, and to look out for each other should come naturally to Oklahomans, and don't settle for less.
And for those women and men who plan a career in social work and possibly doing what you do, advocating, what would you tell them?
Go for it. Go for it. It is extremely rewarding work. It is, whether you're working on systems or individuals' issues, you're still helping individuals. You have the ability to, even if you have the ability to help one human being in your lifetime, do it. Listen to them. Take people where they are. But it's a good line of work. It doesn't pay worth a darn, but there's so much more to life than that, and the rewards personally of being able to know that you made one person's life even a little better are just enormous.
Well, I have one more question, but before I ask it, is there anything else you'd like to add that I have not mentioned today, asked about today?
Oh, I don't know. I think we've covered a lot of ground.
Well, when history is written about you,
oh dear,
what would you like for it to say?
Oh my. She shook it till it was dead. She didn't give up. That if you're in pursuit of a resolution, well, about me, I think that she didn't give up. She hung in there.
Any plans on retiring anytime soon?
Oh, I had plans of retiring before the house burned in the wildfire, and now I'm still paying that one off. So, it'll happen. It'll happen. It'll happen. The deputy state ombudsman said he's not in any hurry for me to retire, but that's just because the budget picture is so bad. He doesn't want to have to face all that alone. I had thought that I would retire. Actually, my plan was to retire just a few years ago. That was when I was going to have the house paid off in 2002, and before I had to build a new one. I had sincerely thought about being able to do some environmental advocacy, to perhaps go back to school on the environmental sciences, whether for pleasure or for a line of work. But I don't know. I have no idea what's going to happen. I anticipate living to be 135. I've had both my hips replaced. I'm good to go. So, I could work for a while.
Well, we didn't even touch upon your work with the Sierra Club or.
It's just as well. I've tried to get off every committee I could possibly get off of.
But we do appreciate your time today and
Thank you.
talking with us.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.